in 2005 is 2,645 pounds of chocolate. What a waste of good chocolate. I mean, people, I'm going to tell you right now, and I blame this on my mother, there wasn't a chocolate I've met in this life that I didn't like. I mean, this should have just been delivered to my home. God forgive me. But, yeah, if you can believe, it is ridiculous how far this is going. We have an Easter egg now that weighs 2,645 pounds. And of course, you know, there are other candies and such, you know, because it's part of the sacrifice and offering we give to Easter. Remember, the ancient practice was to take candies, sweetbreads, flowers, and bring them, you know, to the temple and use them as offerings. And at the top of the temple, if you recall, was the god Moloch. Look at how this poor infant child is cradled in his arms. What it does not show is the fire and such that was consuming that poor little child in an absolute agonizing, torturous death. This is who, you know, these people, among others, were worshiping at the Tower of Babylon. And if you check the Bible very carefully, God tells us not to allow our sons or daughters to pass through the fire. This is what it was talking about. We are not supposed to, you see, because it's, if the children were babies or infants, they would be put on the hands of Moloch. But if they weren't, they would be thrown into the fire pit. And if they could walk through it and get out alive, they couldn't be touched. This is what the Bible was talking about when it said, do not allow your sons or daughters to pass through the fire. And this was done in one particular area known as the Valley of Hinnom. And this, if you look over here, to the left-hand side would be, you know, where the Wailing Wall is. But from this area all the way over is the ancient area known as the Valley of Hinnom. And this is where the practice of making one's sons or daughters pass through the fire to honor Moloch was going on. Now, according to myth, it's an interesting little myth, you know. I won't get into it right now, but the ancient founder of Athens was supposed to have been Cecrops. Okay? Cecrops would have founded Athens right around 1500 BC. Now, in Athens and other cities of the ancient world, they would be celebrating and having these huge festivals and parades going down the streets, honoring the gods and such. And during this time of the year, when it was time to honor Easter, among other sacrifices and things that they brought to honor her, we call, and we will find this in the Bible, believe it or not, hot cross buns. Now, let's face it, these things, oh my goodness, folks, you just give those to me hot and warm, I'll put a ton of butter on them and, you know, prove to you why I can clog my arteries faster than anyone else alive. But the thing is, you see, these things you can find actually mentioned in the Bible as far as, you know, the hot cross buns and how they came about. Now, if we go over to Jeremiah chapter 7, and picking it up in verse 17 through 20, I want you to listen very carefully to what it says here. Because, you see, this was actually a family affair. To create these offerings, to offer them up to the goddess, was a family affair. It says, "Seest thou not what they do in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? The children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead their dough to make cakes to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto other gods, that they may provoke me to answer. And it goes on and go on, but, look this up, folks. Because you see, when you look up the Hebrew word for cakes, the word is kavan, okay? And it literally does mean buns. It really is directly referring to this type of small baked buns or small baked breads. This is exactly what it's talking about. Check the word out. It's kavan. And bring it up. Let's see. Jeremiah chapter 44. Let's go over here. Verse 19, it says, "And when we burnt incense to the Queen of Heaven and poured out drink offerings unto her, did we make her cakes to worship her and pour out drink offerings unto her without amen?" Verse 25. "Thus saith the Lord God of hosts, the God of Israel, saying, Ye and your wives have both spoken with your mouths and fulfilled with your hands, saying, We will surely perform our vows that we have vowed to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven," Semiramis, "and to pour out drink offerings unto her. Ye shall surely accomplish your vows and surely perform your vows." This is who the goddess they were talking about was. And this is what they were doing constantly throughout the Bible. You'll find when they're talking about the Queen of Heaven, they're making these cake offerings and other cake offerings and who knows what else. But this is what they were referring to. These are the kavan, or the hot cross buns that we make nowadays to honor the goddess. I know that we don't do it for that reason, but that's exactly what we are doing. And if you recall, as I said before, there was the new priestesses would actually make bonnets for their heads. And this, believe it or not, it looks just like a baby's bonnet, doesn't it? And this here is an Easter bonnet. It's something very similar that the new priestesses would be given on Easter when they were getting all their new clothes and robes and such and headgear to honor at the top of the Tower of Babylon Easter. And this would be very similar to the bonnets that they did wear. Now, the big question I've always tried to ask people, why are you doing this? I mean, I know it's traditional, but when you look at the truth of it, I mean, people, let's face it, this is exactly what the Bible warns us about. This is nothing but occult practice. And you see, in Ezekiel, and I'm going to show you one last thing, well, got a couple of other things, but let's go over to Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 14. It explains to us that Ezekiel was petitioning God for the sake of Israel, for his people, because they seemed to be under God's punishment or under God's curse for some reason, and Ezekiel didn't know why. So God took Ezekiel and was bringing him to various places throughout Israel and such, and at this point they are in front of the gate, in front of God's temple himself now. And this is what it says. "Then he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was towards the north, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz." Nimrod was supposed to have come back through the act of reincarnation as Tammuz. Now Tammuz, when he was 40 years old, was killed by a wild boar when he was out hunting. For this is where, in this verse, for the first time, you will find reference to what we now call, at least the Catholics practice, and call Lent. You see, Lent is 40 days in its period. Every single one of those days is supposed to represent one of the years of the life in Tammuz. There was 40 years in his life, so there was 40 days of Lent. Ladies were weeping and wailing over the death of Tammuz. They weren't eating, they were fasting, they were giving things up. Well, this is what they do in Lent to this very day. And right after Lent, well, we celebrate the Easter banquet. We have an Easter banquet where the traditional meal is still a ham. Well, symbolically speaking, by eating the ham, you're eating and killing the boar that killed the god Tammuz. That's why you have this. It's a ridiculous belief, but believe it or not, it goes on to this very day. Now, let's go over here to John chapter 20, verse 1. We're about to wrap this up. And I'm going to ask you a question before I start reading it. We have, well, I don't have it, but a lot of Christians and even Catholics practice sunrise services. Now, supposedly, as tradition tells us, Christ was supposed to rise, from the grave as the sun was rising over the horizon and all this type of stuff. That's why they have sunrise services, Well, it makes common sense. That is, until we find out the truth of the Bible. Did Christ resurrect at sunrise or as there was light out? Let's see what John chapter 20 verse 1 says. The first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre. Guess what, folks? It was dark outside. The Bible does not say light. It does not say sunrise. It does not say noonday. It says it was dark outside. And I think God knows the difference since He created the day and the night. The reason we believe that it was we have these sunrise services, well, at least those people who practice it, is because Easter, the goddess Easter, was supposed to have come back during the rising of the sun. And when the sun had risen up, supposedly her egg had fallen to the Euphrates River. And according to the custom, after the priests and priestesses and all the followers were done at the Tower of Babylon, they would all disperse out throughout the entire land to try to find the sacred egg of Easter so they could receive a blessing. Oh, and by the way, this is where you got the Easter egg hunt from. That's how it happened. But trust me, that sunrise service only came about because of Easter, the goddess Easter, because it wasn't Christ. Here it clearly said, when it was yet dark. John chapter 20, verse 1. This is another one of those paganized holidays which the Illuminati was able to candy coat and Christianize and thrust it onto us, and we accepted it. I mean, come on, folks. We're supposed to be born-again children of God. We're the ones who are supposed to know better. And the Scripture makes it very clear so much of these practices that had happened then still going on, and we ourselves allow it. For once, ladies and gentlemen, please, let's stop the paganization of Christianity, and by doing so we can stop the paganization going on in America. Because I'll guarantee you right now, if we don't, the scriptural prophecies pertaining to the occult taking over the whole world is going to happen faster than anyone here can imagine. Mark my words, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't get rid of this occult perversion out of your life, you are never going to truly be able to be blessed as a born-again child of the King. On the Illuminati's calendar, the highest, the most sacred of all nights of human sacrifice is that of Samhain. Now, the nights of Samhain are observed from October 29th through the 31st. October 29th is the first day of Samhain, and the second day of